Welcome to this place of fellowship and inquiry. My name is Jim Wells, and I am a member of the worship ministry here at Live Oak. Whether you are joining us over Zoom or are here in the sanctuary, we are glad you are with us. I want to start by thanking all the people who come together each week to create such a welcome and meaningful Sunday service, and who keep this small but mighty enterprise that is Live Oak going. We appreciate all of you. I also want to say happy solstice, happy Father's Day. I mean, there's a lot going on today. Today we welcome our own member, Ken Solter, to our pulpit. Ken grew up in a secular Jewish family in Los Angeles. He moved to Santa Barbara in 1969 to attend graduate school at UCSB, where he earned a PhD in biology. He and his wife, Aletha, have 2 children, 2 grandchildren, and have been members of Live Oak since 1997. So, welcome, Ken. Glad you're with us.
So in recognition of Father's Day, I'm going to talk about the complex relationship I had with my father. It's been 10 years since he died at the age of 96, and this has given me time to think about how his influence has shaped me, the person I am today. So the picture on the screen is of my father and me at the age of 25, when I was a graduate student at UCSB. On several occasions, I brought my father to Live Oak, so some of you might have met him. I was his caretaker for the last several years of his life, so some of you might also remember me complaining about him. When I was 8 years old, I asked my father, "Why is the sky blue?" He was an artist, so he knew much about color, but he didn't know much about physics, and he couldn't give me the answer. However, he helped me find the answer the next time we went to the library. Yes, the library. This was a long time before the internet. Around the same time, he told me the following joke. A young boy kept asking his father questions, and each time the father replied that he didn't know the answer. The boy, feeling he might be bothering his father, finally asked him if he minded being asked questions. "No," the father replied. "How else are you going to learn?" My parents were Jewish, and Jewish teaching has long emphasized the importance of learning by asking questions. In search of knowledge, students would sit with a rabbi and ask questions about the Torah. In this country, immigrant Jewish mothers were known to ask their children not what they learned in school that day, but what questions they had asked. I was raised in a secular Jewish home, so I never sat with a rabbi nor studied the Torah. But I feel that the Jewish culture in which I was raised taught me the value of the importance of questioning and learning. I have asked questions my entire life. My innate curiosity led me to study science, where my mentor advised me to find my burning question, for which I would be willing to work day and night to find an answer. But I had too many questions and found it difficult to focus on only one, which was one of the reasons why it took me 7 long years to earn my PhD instead of the expected 4 years. So the next picture is of me with my proud parents when I finally received my PhD in 1967. My father's influence was not always positive, and there was one way he treated me which had a lifelong negative impact. and this requires some background information. I was born with a congenital defect called tibial torsion, which is an inward rotation of the tibia. As a toddler, my feet turned inward, and I literally tripped over my own feet when learning to walk. The next picture is of my father holding me as a toddler, and if you look closely, you can see that my feet turn inward. Well, alarmed, my parents brought me to the orthopedic hospital in Los Angeles for a diagnosis. The doctor recommended surgery, which would have required a cast on both legs for 6 months. With all that plaster, I probably would have weighed more than several sacks of potatoes. For my mother, who was not even 5 feet tall, it was a non-starter. She wasn't going to carry an extra heavy toddler around for half a year. No way. So instead of surgery, I had to wear uncomfortable leather straps from my waist to my shoes for several years, which forced my feet outward as I walked. Well, thankfully, as you may have noticed, I eventually learned to walk without falling. Well, sadly, my disability influenced how my father perceived me. Throughout his life, he called me a klutz, which is the Jewish word for a clumsy, uncoordinated person. For years, my wife Aletha tried in vain to correct him. She would tell him, "Ken is not a klutz." Well, I think he had selective hearing problems because it never made a difference. Well, needless to say, being called a klutz had a very negative impact on me. I never thought of myself as athletic, and in school, I was always picked last for the sport team. It wasn't until I became a cyclist about 20 years ago that I had an inkling that I was physically coordinated and athletic. However, I continued to think that I had 2 left feet, and dancing was the last thing in the world I ever thought I would be doing. However, 10 years ago, almost exactly, after my father died, I gathered my courage and I joined Aletha in doing international folk dancing, which we still do twice a week. My ability to master folk dancing provided the final piece of evidence that I am not a klutz. Well, negative comments about my physical coordination gave me a deep understanding of how it feels to be put down. I have always tried to accept people as they are. I don't belittle or make fun of anyone, and I have always given my own children positive support. So as an aside, a beneficial outcome of my disability occurred in 1964 when I had to register for the draft. Okay, the Vietnam War was ramping up. Student deferments were increasingly difficult to obtain. So I informed the draft board that I had a physical disability, and as you would expect, they wanted evidence. So my father went over to the orthopedic hospital where I'd been treated as a toddler and requested that my medical records be sent to the draft board. 3 weeks later, without a physical exam by the Army, I received a classification of 4F, which meant I was physically unfit for military service. I'm sure that the draft board probably thought I was confined to a wheelchair. This was the only time in my life when I was delighted to be unqualified for anything, or for something. So I'm opposed to violence and war, and I acquired these sentiments from my father. Like most men of his generation, he served in World War II, but he considered himself a pacifist. The next picture shows my father in uniform. Had I not received a permanent draft deferment, he would have supported me to flee to Canada. Thankfully, that wasn't necessary. My father was a do-it-yourselfer, As a child, I helped him repair all sorts of things around the home, from leaky faucets to washing machines. Related to his do-it-yourself approach to life, he was a craftsman who appreciated tools. He taught me to use a variety of tools and cautioned me never to use a tool for something it wasn't designed to do, because that is how accidents happened. He had learned his woodworking skills from his own father, who was a carpenter. As an artist, my father used those woodworking skills to create wooden objects. And I brought a couple of these wooden objects to show you. The first one is called a do-nothing machine. He didn't invent this thing, but he made a very nice example of it. And it's just something to sit there and play with. It doesn't do anything. And I'll leave it up here and you can look at it later. This is a bowl or plate that my father made on a lathe, and it's from a solid piece of walnut. And you can look at that. He was very talented in that way. So because of his influence and encouragement, I feel confident working with my hands and using tools to build and repair things. My father took pride in a job well done. I remember telling me countless times, if a job is worth doing, it's worth doing right. Of course, sometimes it came out in a more earthly manner, like, don't do a job half-assed. So I took this admonition to heart, and I became a perfectionist. However, I've come to realize that being perfect requires a lot of energy and time, and often leads to frustration. As I've grown older, I'm much more tolerant of my imperfections. In 1980, the postdoc grant that was supporting my research at UCSB was not going to be renewed. And I decided that academia was not my calling. I made a significant change in my career. I left science to go into business with my father. My parents moved from Los Angeles to Santa Barbara, where my father and I opened a store selling imported leaded beveled glass panels for doors and windows. In the next picture, taken in 1981, my father and I are standing in front of our store on Mission Street in Santa Barbara. Well, this was quite a change from lab work. We soon discovered that many customers liked beveled glass, but wanted colorful stained glass panels. Neither of us had ever worked with stained glass, but we didn't let that stop us. We read a few books, bought some supplies, and taught ourselves to create custom panels of stained glass. And again, remember, this was a long time before the internet. There were no YouTube videos to watch. In the next photo, my father and I are putting the finishing touches on a custom stained glass panel. My father used his artistic skills to design the panels. Working daily with my father gave me the opportunity to learn about design and the use of color. I also gained confidence to tackle projects for which I had no prior experience. The next photo shows one of the many stained glass panels that we created based on my father's original design. So I was an early reader, beginning with Walt Disney comic books, which I still have stored in my garage. I soon progressed the books, checking out the maximum number every time I visited a library. My father, who was always reading books, encouraged this habit and recommended some of his favorite authors. My father also exposed me to the visual arts, and our family frequently visited art galleries and museums. When I was 12, I remember seeing a traveling exhibition of Van Gogh in Los Angeles. Well, incidentally, several years ago, when Alita and I were staying with Dutch friends in the Netherlands, I learned that the correct pronunciation of that artist's name is not Van Gogh, as Americans pronounce it, but Van Gogh. So our friend said, just remember, Dutch is not a language. It's a throat disease. So I do not have the talent to be an artist. However, my father was also interested in photography, and he had a makeshift darkroom where I enjoyed developing film and printing photos. As a teenager, I took the next picture of my father using a time-delayed shutter release, and I developed and printed it myself in our own darkroom. My attraction to photography led me to take a year of photography in high school. I even considered becoming a professional photographer, but that's where my father drew the line. He advised me to become a doctor and save photography for a hobby. My parents were both unabashed liberals, and that's how I acquired my leftist political leanings. My father encouraged me to become politically active and told me they had both voted for Henry Wallace, who was the Progressive Party candidate in the 1948 presidential election. He also proudly told me that in 1938, when he was attending Los Angeles City College, he and some friends got together and disrupted a meeting of the German-American Bund, which was the American Nazi Party. His parents had immigrated to this country at the beginning of the 20th century to escape the horrific pogroms in Eastern Europe. As a member of an oppressed group, my father showed compassion for other oppressed groups and emphasized that everyone is worthy of respect regardless of differences such as skin color, ethnic heritage, or religion. He told me never to use a derogatory term when talking about someone who is different from me. So an example of this is the Yiddish word schwarze. It's a highly offensive and derogatory racial slur directed at black people. It's equivalent to the N-word in English. I occasionally heard relatives use that term to describe their house cleaners, who at that time were often women of color. I was quite young when I first heard it, and my father told me never to use that or any other derogatory word. My parents had friends of several ethnicities, and I am grateful to them for being good role models. Well, I never saw my father exercise. And as he grew older, he suffered from debilitating medical conditions, which exercise is known to prevent. Unlike my father, I have chosen to exercise regularly, and I hope I will have a better end-of-life experience than he did. I also differ from my father in my social life. He was somewhat of a loner, avoiding social gatherings. My parents didn't belong to a synagogue or any social group, and they had only a few close friends. As they grew older, their friends passed away, and after my mother died, my father was basically alone. During his last years, he suffered from depression, and I suspect his lack of friends contributed to that feeling. Well, my path has been different. I belong to several social groups and have a number of friends. I have no doubt that these social connections will contribute to my emotional well-being as I grow older. So related to my father's lack of social connections was his expectation that I would take care of him as he aged. For the last 5 years of his life, I was his primary caretaker. It was a burden I did not ask for and did not want, but did it anyways. The next photo shows me pushing my father in a wheelchair when he was no longer able to walk. At first, I started taking him to medical appointments and cooking occasional meals. But as time went on, I had to assume more responsibilities, including finances, food shopping, meal preparation, doing house repairs and upkeep, and eventually helping him dress and use the bathroom. For the last year and a half of his life, I spent every night in his house, and I was incredibly stressed. As a result of this experience, I have no expectation that my children will take care of me as I age. I do not wish to place that burden on their shoulders. My father was very stubborn and did not want to hire caregivers, but I hired some anyways. So in conclusion, I learned much from my father, not only by what he said and taught me, but also by how he lived his life. These are the main things I learned from him. 1, be curious and never stop asking questions. 2, never underestimate your ability to learn new skills. 3, appreciate a job well done. 4, remember the inherent worth and dignity of everyone, which is one of the Unitarian Universalist principles. 5, finally, from seeing what my father didn't do, I learned to value the importance of exercising and having friends. I have mixed feelings about my father. Love tinged with resentment, but I do miss him. To this day, sorry. Obviously, I have feelings. To this day, if something interesting happens in my life, or if I read or hear something about something that he would have found interesting, my first thought is to call him and tell him about it. He will always be part of my life.